everyone. This is Matt with ESI Survival Guide. We are an online resource to help all of you legal professionals out there navigate the electronic wilderness. And I'm very, very excited for the podcast today. But before I introduce Brenda and Ben, just a few housekeeping items. First, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you'll know when new videos come out. And of course, we always like your likes and your comments. And of course, I have to give the obligatory disclaimer. This is for educational purposes only. So the thoughts, comments, statements, commands, declarations, hopes, dreams, wishes of all the speakers that speak today are theirs only and not those of their respective employers, friends, family, colleagues, or anybody else. And if you do have a particular legal matter that you're in the midst of, please talk to a lawyer. If you're so inclined, call one of the two guests that we have on the podcast today. But otherwise, this is not legal advice. This is merely meant for educational purposes. So without further ado, let me introduce our two guests. First, let me introduce Brenda Sharton. Brenda is partner and chair of Dechert's Cybersecurity and Privacy Practice Group. And that practice group was named by Law360 as Practice Group of the Year. And also, Brenda was individually named as Law360's MVP of cybersecurity and data privacy. And if I can just put into perspective how awesome that is, only 5 attorneys are recognized with that each year. So congrats, Brenda, on that. And if I could, I'm going to put both Brenda and Ben's bios in the description of the YouTube video because there's way too much to describe. But Brenda essentially has worked on over 1,000 cybersecurity incidents and attacks of all shapes and sizes. And her practice group actually represents many cutting edge AI companies out there. So you're going to see a lot of stuff in the news about the stuff that Dechert's doing in this cutting edge space. Brenda, can you tell us a little more about your practice?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. And thanks for that awesome introduction. I'm a litigation partner at Dechert LLP. Dechert is a global law firm. We have 22 offices around the world, a full service law firm. And I also chair, as you mentioned, the privacy and cybersecurity practice at Dechert. Our team is worldwide. My practice centers on, as you mentioned, data breaches, litigation, defense of government enforcement actions, as well as consumer class actions, very often having to do with data or cutting edge technology. I've been practicing for 32 years, but doing this type of cybersecurity and privacy law since the late 1990s, really with the advance of the internet. So that makes me very, very old.
You've seen it all. So I'm very excited to get your opinion on this generative AI and where we are in the state of things today. Thank you so much, Brenda. And let me also introduce Ben Sadun. Ben is a partner in Dechert's LA office. And Ben, if I can give your marquee highlight or one of the many highlights out there, you're a trial lawyer, and one of your verdicts in 2019 was named by the Daily Journal as one of the top verdicts of 2019. And this past year, you were also named by the Legal 500 US as a top lawyer in the Product Liability, Mass Tort and Class Action space. Can you tell us a little bit about your practice?
Well, Matt, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Like Brenda, I'm a partner at Dechert, and you're right, I do specialize in taking cases to verdict at trial. My practice focuses primarily on the intersection of technology and other spaces. So technology in health is a common one, and previous to that, technology in pharmaceutical companies, and more recently, artificial intelligence. We really are doing cutting edge work here at Dechert. Just recently, for one of our many clients, we won the Innovation Award by the largest privacy group there is, HIAKUS. And so we really like to stay cutting edge, leading the market, providing smart and sensible solutions to our clients.
I appreciate that, Ben. And Ben did not know that he was going to give a plug for a future video, because we are doing a video on studying for the CIPP exam, which is given by the IAPP. So thanks, Ben, for setting that up.
That worked out great.
Perfectly. So let's jump right in. And to be honest, I can't think of another topic that is ubiquitous as this whole ChatGPT topic. It seems to be everywhere. I almost feel that sometimes I'm kind of behind the ball with releasing a podcast that's, months behind a lot of the other discussions about ChatGPT. And I think it only came out in November of last year, and we're already in this space where there's a lot of concern, there's a lot of development, a lot of innovation. I can only imagine from your perspectives being in the midst of all the legal issues that are kind of generating, if you will, for no pun intended, from this whole new technology. So if I could, let's take a step back. And for those that may be uninitiated, Brenda, can you tell us a little bit, what is generative AI? What is ChatGPT? And why is this such a big issue?
Sure. It's yet another leap in the evolution of technology. It's another milestone. I'm old enough, as I mentioned, to remember when the internet first came on the scene in the 90s, and this reminds me of that type of milestone. But what is it? So generative AI is really a subcategory of artificial intelligence. It focuses on using algorithms to generate content such as images, text, or sounds, instead of simply recognizing or classifying that data. So ChatGPT, and GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer, is an open source language generating AI model developed by a company by the name of OpenAI. ChatGPT-4 is the latest iteration of that. It operates based on a deep learning architecture known as a transformer. And through the transformer architecture, GPT-4 can generate coherent and contextually relevant text based on inputs provided by users. More recently, it has a plugin adaptation which will allow it to source from across the internet. We can get into that a little further detail later. The use of AI, Matt, has gained popularity exponentially in recent months. Within the span of 1 week, the number of GPT-4 users increased from 1 million to 100 million. That was maybe just sometime in February.
Wow.
2023.
Yeah, I mean, the legal applications too, which we'll talk about, are exploding. I know that my own company, Concilio, we just had an internal meeting about how we're leveraging generative AI and Chat GPT specifically for some of the things we're doing. But Brenda, you said one thing that also kind of blew my mind a little bit without maybe even realizing it, is I know that Chat GPT, obviously it works with text, obviously with images. I remember my first experience with it was with the DALL-E generative texting. My brother's an artist, and he came out all pissed off that it was going to eliminate commercial artists from the job market. But you said sounds, and that freaks me out, because I almost wonder if you could enter a prompt that's like, say something in the voice of Samuel Jackson or something like that. And as a lawyer, the possibilities of that kind of being a little bit in the nefarious realm seem like they could magnify exponentially. But that's super helpful. Ben, can you talk a little bit about, Brenda laid out what generative AI is. Can you talk about kind of how it works?
Sure. But I also think it's important to note, she talked about the logarithmic curve in terms of use. You've really seen that same growth curve in terms of its development. Going back to about, let's say, 4 years ago with ChatGPT version 2, it had the intelligence of a kindergartner. And then 6 months ago with the release of ChatGPT 3.5, it had the intelligence of a middle schooler. But ChatGPT 4, the newest version, so just in the last 6 months, it's now passing the bar exam, getting in the 93rd percentile on the LSAT, on the GMAT. I mean, it's an exponential growth curve, and one can't even fathom what the intelligence will be 2 years from now. In terms of its creation, it was trained through a combination of reinforced learning and self-supervised learning. What basically means is the self-training component, the reinforced learning, it's trying to predict what the next word in a sentence would be. So it's fed a huge data set of information, and it learns patterns in syntax. Then through the reinforcement learning, you have humans actually labeling, identifying what's correct, what's wrong, what's responsive, what's helpful, what's not. And the secret sauce of ChatGPT versus many of the competitors out there on the internet is twofold. One, they actually have a much smaller data set for the reinforcement component. Everyone else thought more data is better. ChatGPT said, let's do less data and curate it. So more human labeling, more annotations by humans. And that's why the results are so much more accurate and the syntax is so vastly improved. That also means it's less scalable as a consequence. So it's going to take a little bit more time than some of the most optimistic people say for it to achieve superhuman intelligence, but it absolutely still will. We are very much on that path. And the other interesting wrinkle of ChatGPT is it was built on top of Codex, which is what OpenAI created to help programmers write code. So it's used by GitHub for Copilot. It's used by pretty much every software development company to help debug their software. And surprisingly, it turns out that computer programming code is not that different from human speaking, no matter the language. And everyone else assumed, of course, these are radically different things. Why would we feed that data ones and zeros? Why would we teach it C++? But surprisingly, ChatGPT is much better at the English language, for instance, because it also knows these other languages, computer languages. And so that really is a distinguishing factor that has proven to be the secret sauce for ChatGPT.
Yeah, you mentioned sound being kind of a scary feature of it. There's so many nefarious things that you could do with that, as I think your mind went right to. But
not that it always goes to those places. I just
yeah, as a trial lawyer, I'm thinking, how's that cross-examination going to go? Oh, that wasn't me. Or I think just in the news yesterday, they had a fake kidnapping where they were able to take sounds. Now, I don't know whether that was using this particular software, but convince parents that they were talking to their own loved one to try to do ransom. And then, of course, as someone who handles ransom attacks and cyber extortion all the time, and you see that we're going to talk about what happens in the phishing emails and what the implications are of ChatGPT for phishing campaigns, potentially. You'll see that in sort of all walks of life, that there will be a lot of nefarious purposes to which this can be put.
And there's one that we're going to talk about later when we get to ransomware that might be a little bit interesting for viewers. But Brenda, Benjamin talked about how these generative AI models work and kind of the human component, this tagging, this labeling. That almost kind of brings me back to the kind of predictive coding AI in the legal realm a little bit. But one of the things we're talking about now that's kind of in the zeitgeist, if you will, or that's in current events of technology is who owns stuff. That big tech and Twitter and Facebook and who owns this data. Is OpenAI and these developers, are they the new owners of all of our data when we're putting stuff into these models, when people are adding their input? Who owns this stuff? Is it open source and we all own it as a unit? Or is it on a server someplace where these companies now are collecting even more data? Because I know I spend hours just typing in nonsense into ChatGPT. Is all that stored somewhere? And that's going to be another thing we have to contend with?
It is indeed stored somewhere and collected by the company. And it is an even bigger data scenario. And there are all kinds of legal implications to that. If you think about being an employer, and most employers don't have policies or procedures yet for use of ChatGPT-4 or AI. And you have workers who are trying to become more efficient at their job by using it. You don't have any control over what they're putting into and for their prompts. And you can have confidential information of the company, trade secret information of the company that inadvertently a worker uploads as part of their prompts or part of the prompting process. And now suddenly that information is in the databases of
You're uploading trade secret information.
Yes, of the AI company. So there are all kinds of legal implications that not only companies are going to have to think about when they think about who owns data, consumers will have to think about as they input data into this, but also from a legal standpoint, protecting your own company's IP, trade secrets, confidential information. You're going to have policies and procedures around how employees can use this technology, as well as probably blocks and things like that, until that can all get figured out so you can protect the company jewels in the short term.
Sure.
And because ChatGPT is built on top of Codex, it is exceptionally good. Maybe it's what it's best at is writing computer code. And so it's widely used throughout technology companies to help improve their own code. And as a consequence, people are uploading in the prompts source code from their respective companies, asking ChatGPT, how can I improve this line of code? And of course, if you give up the source code, you're giving effectively a backdoor key into your system, which has huge cybersecurity and ransomware implications.
Yeah, so, when during the pre-interview, I was thinking about all the permutations of what I was going to ask both of you. And all of a sudden, as we're talking, I'm thinking of a million more things. I mean, there seems to be endless with regards to the legal issues. Brenda, when you talked about people loading this data in and end users kind of putting data and prompts into it, maybe accidentally uploading trade secrets and whatnot, it also seems to be something that implicates larger data privacy issues as well. We won't get into it in depth, but I know that the Italian supervisory authority just banned ChatGPT in Italy because of on a multifold basis. One being that there wasn't a lawful basis for processing, but also that it didn't have the proper age restrictions in there. But it seems to me that that's going to become not only an increasing issue for regulators in the EU, but that also might trigger more regulation in the US with regards to individuals' data.
Speaking about the Italian regulator, it's also a great example for unintended consequences. So they were concerned that children would be getting age inappropriate material. And so they blocked ChatGPT altogether. And in the place of ChatGPT, there have been a bunch of clones that have emerged, buying URLs like ChatGPTAI.com instead of OpenAI.com. And so trying to confuse consumers that they are ChatGPT because now consumers can't access the real product. And these third parties are absolutely harvesting data. ChatGPT was founded on philanthropic principles. It started as a nonprofit co-founded by Elon Musk, of all people. But it genuinely does try to do good for the universe, though not perfectly. These third parties have much more malicious intents. And through that regulation, they've now made the situation in Italy far worse.
Wow. Well, yeah, I also saw in one report, and I'm probably not getting it technically correct, but I saw that even that block, essentially OpenAI placed like a geofence or a geo-block on Italy. So that technically, even with a VPN, you could maybe get around it if you were able to. Maybe you can ask ChatGPT how to do it. So before we jump into the legal industry applications, and I want to focus on a lot of these applications because they're super interesting, let's just show some folks what this actually looks like. So I'm actually going to share my screen and jump in to ChatGPT. Now, I'm already logged in. If you log in as an end user out there, folks in internet land, there'll be a login. You'll have to supply an email address, but there is a free version. And Ben and I were talking in the pre-interview. This is not ChatGPT 4. That is a different access point, but let's type in a prompt. And I'm going to type in, write a haiku about the legal profession. Courtroom hush descends, robes, gavels, and arguments. Justice, law, defend. Hey, it's pretty good. I mean, that's one of the things I like about ChatGPT, and one of the uses that I use it for. Brenda, you mentioned that employers may not know what their employees are using it for, and maybe I'm giving up too much by saying this, but sometimes if you haven't noticed, I'm very verbose. I can be very long-winded in my writing as well. And I'll use it to condense an email or to maybe draft some salient points from a larger article. But I also like the creative elements of it. This one gives us a little haiku right here.
For comparison, I ran the same prompt through the paid version, so you were using the public free version, and I'm not sure it's objectively better. This is obviously a subjective determination, but ChatGPT 4 says, in halls of justice, wisdom weaves through precedent, balanced scales of law.
Oh, I like yours a lot
It's
better.
good, but I'm not sure it's better.
I think I like yours a lot better.
Yeah. You can see the implications. You could have a sales organization where there's a volume sales premium and you're having to send out volume emails or follow-up emails to sell product. And you can see your employees using that, and maybe the employer doesn't know, maybe the employer encourages it.
So Brenda, you're predicting a whole heck of a lot of use policies coming out around these types of things.
Absolutely. It'll be the Full Employment Act for lawyers for quite some time, I'm sure.
I'm going to kind of ping pong a couple use cases off both of you. Ben, I'll start with you. I know that one of the big articles that was out there was this Joshua Browder, who is, I believe, the CEO of a group called Do Not Pay. And at some point he had mentioned that we're going to make history, and he's going to have the first person who is advised by ChatGPT to actually go and argue a ticket of some sort. Basically, that was halted because a lot of state prosecutors threatened some type of a jail time sanction. But do you envision, is ChatGPT going to enable individuals to represent themselves pro se?
It's not going to replace the role of the lawyer, but it'll certainly, for low stakes, simple matters, I think principally small claims court, make people better self-advocates, those individuals that are choosing to be pro se in the first instance. You're also assuming when you set up that prompt that no one has used it already. No one has publicly acknowledged doing everything via AI, but people have wearable devices now. These glasses have Amazon Echo built into them. They're Amazon glasses. They're
Really?
speakers that are very subtle and you can't detect or see.
Oh.
And it uses vibrations to send audio to me directly and no one else can hear. I could be in court, be given information from ChatGPT and no one would know. Now, I don't think ChatGPT is going to be as good as me or Brenda would be otherwise, but I absolutely see pro se individuals using it to improve their arguments.
And Brenda, you talked about individuals uploading data into this and kind of using that as a prompt. I think a lot of times we think of prompts as kind of the little things I just typed out just there, but prompts can be as much text as you could load in. Do you foresee folks loading in like the entire record of a case to try and figure out how to plea bargain or to force a settlement or to push it down into that avenue? What do you think folks could use it for in that realm?
Well, I think for the simpler things, and of course, this just keeps getting smarter and smarter, as Ben pointed out in the beginning. I think the first time it took the LSAT, the law school admissions test, it scored in the 10th percentile. And more recently, just within just a short period of time, it suddenly was in the 93 percentile or thereabouts. So it will get better. So I think that you'll see that type of, you might be able to get a quick read. But I really believe that in a case, for the example that you use, so let's stick with that. Who's going to win? What are the odds? It could give you the odds of, in this jurisdiction for these type of claims with this judge, here are your percentages. But what it will never do, and I don't think ever, is be able to tell you which witnesses came off most credibly or will come off most credibly, what the judge's nuances are, subtleties are that you can only learn from having been in that judge's courtroom many, many times. So there will be so many subtleties, or the very specific, you don't know who the jury is going to be or who the jurors are going to end up being, what their bent is. So I go back far enough that I remember when the internet, I think it was about 1999, it went from 9 million users to 99 million users. It was around the late 90s. It may not have been quite that late, but it was a huge jump over the course of a year. And I remember the same discussions around the internet. Well, now you've got the internet, you have all this access to information. Surely in 20 years, lawyers will be obsolete, or you'll be able to get all this learning from just going on and doing searches. That has not happened. And at a certain point, there is literally no substitute for that judgment that comes in and understanding, this isn't quite going to cut it on a claim like this. I don't mean to discount. You can get a lot of intelligence for sure. We want to do some research on this, or we want to find out what the judge's percentages are on that. There is a lot of great intelligence to be had. So I don't mean to minimize that. I just think that for the example you used, you're probably not going to have that as your only data point as to what's going to happen in the case.
And to build on Brenda's point, I'm not even convinced right now it would do a good job of providing the simple statistics. And that's because data in, data out. It doesn't have access to PACER, which is the Federal Repository of Cases. It doesn't have access the state cases or their outcomes. It was trained on only effectively, in the legal context, news clippings from highly sensationalized and public trials. That is a huge self-selection bias. And so the statistics that are true of those limited cases is not going to be true of your everyday case or any particular case that has a unique set of facts. Down the road, should ChatGPT and OpenAI get access to a larger repository of case law, that simpler task might be achievable. But I certainly echo Brenda's sentiment. They still have a long ways to go even on that, and then an even taller mountain to climb for the judgment. And frankly, I doubt any computer will ever replace human judgment.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it would be obvious because we're talking about case law, right? And precedent, and that is in text, that you could just load every case into this model and seemingly get good data out of it. But to be honest, let me share my screen again, because one of the things I always try to do is try to figure out where the holes are in this thing. So if I could share my screen again, for those of you out there that are e-discovery case law nerds, and there's been a lot of articles about specifically with case law, ChatGPT getting it wrong. But I typed in a prompt. My favorite case is LORRAINE v. MARKEL. It's a famous Judge Grimm case. I'm just going to type in the prompt, brief the salient points of Judge Grimm's LORRAINE v. MARKEL decision. And let's see what it comes up with here. Okay, so it was Judge Paul Grimm. It is 2007. So it's going into a lot of different points, such as preservation, duties of a producing party, and all these different topics. However, anyone who knows this case, the crux of it is all about admissibility. It goes through all of these different types of formats of ESI and talks about admissibility of each of them in detail. So if you were going to brief this, if I was a law student and I was trying to find the salient points of LORRAINE v. MARKEL, I'd be wrong. Because although these are good points and these are discussed inherently in the opinion, it's not really the focus of this opinion. So that's just one example of it being incorrect, in my opinion. But
Matt, ChatGPT 4 got it right. I gave the exact same prompt.
Okay.
And it gave the correct answer.
You thwarted my point, Ben. But so, okay, well, you know what? That actually just illustrated Brenda's point beautifully, that this thing is increasing exponentially in its intelligence. That's a perfect example of the increase in ChatGPT 4. Ben, do you know, does GPT-4 have the same limitation where it doesn't go past 2021?
That's correct. It ends, I want to say July of 2021, but some point in 2021 is the stop date, which is in contrast to what Google has released. Google has come out with their own competitor, Bard, and that is current through the day prior. And so it's constantly digesting new information. Google has gone that other approach I described at the very beginning, which is they think more data is better. So they're doing less curating, less labeling. And so, frankly, they're getting more things wrong, but it is more contemporaneous and it does have more recent events.
Interesting. I haven't played around with Bard yet, but that's probably something I should do. Brenda, in terms of the legal realm, what do you think are the current applications that are most viable? I've seen it applied to docketing. I've seen it talked about in the context of first pass review and a litigation. You know, where do you think it can be used ethically in its current form?
That's a great question. I think there are many, many current uses for it. Cost savings for some of our clients will be useful for pro se plaintiffs, as you mentioned. But basically, there are many, many uses at a law firm. I mean, you could use it for a first pass on a quick look at a research question. I think that it probably isn't there yet for the reasons that you just demonstrated. I don't know that you could ever rely on it yet, but you could see that in the future if you just wanted a quick read. What's the major case? Could you digest this article for me? There's been articles on law firms trying to use it as can you write a press release for me? But
Sure.
again, I think that maybe from marketing, business development, very low level, give me a summary to get started. But I don't think you could ever rely on it at this point in time to say, well, that's the law. And you gave a perfect example of that. This was what the case stood for. That's what the law is. There'll be no substitute in the short term for looking at exactly what the law is. We don't know how it would handle a straight on conflict between a statute and a case.
Right.
We don't yet know how it would handle and what the nuances of that are and what the case law would say. And so I think it would be premature for anyone to start using it in that fashion other than, hey, it's a starting point right now.
Right.
And I'm sure that in maybe whoever's listening to this podcast in 30, 40 years will be laughing hysterically at what I just said, but maybe even a lot less than that, maybe 20 years. But I think that there's a long way to go. And as I said, I don't think you'll ever see the substitute for experience and judgment.
I want to go to another prompt that's going to open up another question. So let's jump around a little bit. And I think this leads perfectly into the unauthorized practice of law. So let's say I'm a law student, or a disbarred attorney, or just someone who doesn't have a law degree. And I go in here and I say, draft me a civil complaint in New York State related to a slip and fall in a grocery store. All right, let's see what it comes up with that. It's probably going to think, okay, so it starts doing some stuff. So if I were to take this and give it to my buddy who doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer, or even if, then they go represent themselves pro se, am I engaged in the unauthorized practice of law? Am I, by drafting this prompt, taking this content and then giving that out as legal advice to somebody, am I, by virtue of doing that, being unethical and potentially engaged in the unauthorized practice of law? What do you guys think?
Were you compensated?
Maybe.
I think that's one for the Board of Bar Overseers. I probably wouldn't feel comfortable opining on that.
So, but it's interesting, right? Because I think it drafts these things that look very much like, pleadings and whatnot. And I think that's where you can get into these ethical issues, and where I think a lot of the attorneys that are touching this topic are getting very, very concerned about it. But yeah, that's just one thing that I thought was kind of interesting. And please, anyone watching this, don't screenshot that and use it for your slip and fall case. Okay.
I mean, it's not that different than looking up in the encyclopedia, like, what does a complaint look like? Or using Google to ask an analogous question. So in this instance, you really didn't generate anything. OpenAI did. So I have a hard time imagining you personally having liability if you're just helping a friend.
Point. I think we can't lose sight of, we're not going from absolutely nothing to these prompts generating this. And it would be an interesting exercise to see some of these more simple prompts, what it would generate if you just searched for it through a search engine on the internet.
Well, Brenda, that also begs the question, are we going to start seeing, like, let's say that did come up, or do you think we're going to start seeing cases where ChatGPT or generative AI data is within scope of a matter? Is this stuff discoverable?
Well, if it's used by attorneys, it would fall under the attorney work product. It would not be discoverable. It may be if you have somebody who did this prior to retaining a lawyer, and they generated some of these documents, and they were in their files or on their computer, then it would be discoverable. But I also don't want to lose sight. There's nothing terribly alarming about what you just generated on the screen. If you think about the fact that when I was clerking for a judge in 1990, he had a textbook. This is the late and great Justice Nolan on the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court on torts in tort law. And I'm quite certain that in that book were draft complaints and many, many other books like it. And even the bar associations put out documents like that. So it may not be that different, but you're using, of course, the simplest example, right? And maybe if you prompted, if one of the things with ChatGPT 4 that I've found is if you keep prompting it, it will give you more and more sophisticated answers. That's on 4.
Right. Well, there's actually an example of that too. We're going to talk about here in a second when we move into the cybersecurity realm.
But I have heard and seen some people on the internet freaking out about, is privilege or work product broken because it's on the server of OpenAI? And I think that is not a complicated question. The answer is just flatly no. Right now, if you send an email to a client that uses Gmail, that email is on Google's server. Courts universally have said that it remains privileged. This is just a different server from a different company. There is no human third party that would break work product or privilege.
Tangentially related to that, OpenAI also says in their FAQ that the copyright holder is the prompt generator, right? So there's some interesting things in there as well. So let's move into, we covered legal education. I had some questions about that, but I think we covered kind of ChatGPT's use in the legal realm. I know that some law professors I'm friends with are trying to use it to reverse engineer student answers to see if they can tell if they're using it, which they can't. But let's jump into the more hot button issue that I think is on most folks' minds in the legal community, and that's the dual issue of privacy and cybersecurity. Brenda, what are some of the privacy pitfalls that this technology presents?
Well, I can tell you that the FTC and other regulators are highly focused on companies' use of AI, and that the intersection of privacy, security, and consumer protection and these evolving technologies continue to be front and center. In particular for the FTC. The FTC will be looking at this very carefully. AI is regulated. It would be regulated under the general powers of unfair and deceptive trade practice laws. And Section 5, which is the authority the FTC will use, that extends to companies making, selling, or using AI. If you're going to make a claim about AI, it's got to be accurate. It's got to be true. And they're going to be digging right into that. And they're not the only regulator who will be looking at that. You'll have state attorneys general. You'll have privacy regulators in other countries looking at what companies are saying. And they're saying it's not going to be good enough to say it's a black box. The FTC came out recently with advance notice of proposed rulemaking. It contained an entire section that explored rulemaking for automated decision-making systems, i.e. AI, and said companies that failed to comply with the FTC's expectations, they could face, if we look at their history and their track record here, they could face regulatory penalties, be forced even to delete the algorithms. We've seen that in 3 different matters. Their data, their models, and there's some recent enforcement actions in which the FTC has made companies delete their algorithms. And then, of course, whatever the FTC does, they come out with enforcement action. Now you have the plaintiff lawyers coming out of the woodwork, to bring their consumer class actions. Increasingly around the globe, certainly in the United States and increasingly outside of the US too. So there's a lot of danger to be had, and this is an area of immense interest.
Ben, did you want to comment on some of the privacy pitfalls?
Absolutely. I do think people are going to get very casual and cavalier about sharing personal information to ChatGPT. No one thinks twice about sending an email to a family member or a loved one. Again, that data is going on Google servers. This is not very different. And soon there'll just be an expectation of privacy and ignorance of the potential consequences of sharing personal information.
As a privacy practitioner, I will neither confirm nor deny whether or not I've been a little bit liberal with the prompts that I put into ChatGPT. So yeah, I think it's funny you say that, because I think there is this really strange dichotomy where as technology improves and becomes more ubiquitous, and privacy becomes much more of an issue for the general consumer, people seem, and I don't know if it's an age thing, young versus old or whatnot, but people just seem to be more willing to give up their information, even as they pick it for privacy, which I think is a bizarre dynamic.
And there's going to be more opportunity. I mean, just today, news leaked that Samsung is thinking of giving up Google as the default search engine for a combination of Bing and ChatGPT. So it is quickly becoming the world's default homepage, and that means they're going to get more and more personal information.
So pivoting from privacy, the corollary cybersecurity. Brenda, what issues do you see here? There's one little exercise I wanted to jump into that I thought I read in an article online, and I'm not going to go too deep down the rabbit hole because I don't want to be on any kind of FBI watch list or anything. But I did think it was interesting playing with ChatGPT and some code that I was able to generate. But what do you see are the primary cybersecurity issues that this type of technology presents?
Well, it's interesting. I figured you would ask that question, Matt. And so I thought it would be an interesting exercise. And I don't pretend to be the first one to do this because you see all the newscasters, everybody who's reporting on this puts the question through to ChatGPT-4. But I put it through and said, what are the cybersecurity risks associated with your platform and others like it? And it gave an interesting list. It was pretty good, but I'm not going to use their list. I'm going to use my list.
Sure.
So
the viewers want to hear your list. So
it's kind of twofold, right? You've got the cybersecurity risks associated with the platform itself and all of the data that it has. And for example, I mean, it was taken offline in March of 2023 due to a bug that permitted certain users to see randomly the titles assigned to other users' conversations, as well as other users' first and last name, email address, payment address, the last 4 digits of a credit card, the expiration dates. And so there was sort of an unintentional visibility there. That's one type of data breach. I'm not going to comment on their cybersecurity internally because I don't have a lot of information about that. But I can tell you, anytime you have a repository like that, you are a huge target of cyber criminals. And that includes of nation state sponsored threat actors. That includes organized crime. It includes all kinds of nefarious threat actors that reside around the world that would target the information. But what I quickly went to was, good God, we're seeing such sophisticated social engineering phishing campaigns out there. We're defending our clients, and this will make it exponentially harder. I can't imagine everybody's training their employees to recognize phishing emails. Here, you could generate very sophisticated phishing emails off of the platform, because with the plugins for ChatGPT, there's so much information out there. And you could say, write me an email that sounds like it came from the CEO of XYZ company, and use some recent press release to do that. I don't think they're there yet because they don't have current events in. And then just the volume of phishing emails. Hit every employee who has their email on the internet who works at XYZ company and write them an email that seems to come from another company that might be a vendor. And so it's going to make that job of training exponentially harder, including voice recognition. It's going to sound like it came from CEO of XYZ company. I mean, it's
crazy.
Incredible, the implications. So you have that, you have data poisoning. Individuals could tamper with a company's trained data sets, which could affect the AI that's coming out of it or the responses that the AI software gives to its users. So if it's based on the wrong word association and doesn't include independent fact-checking feature, you could mess with that. We talked about the compromised trade secrets or confidential information. We have credential stuffing and other types of data breaches where you could, through the sophisticated AI language models, you could try to make guesses of user passwords and other sensitive information because you have everything about them at your fingertips in a minute, and you can give me every variation of passwords related to so-and-so's dog's name or child's birth date or whatever it is. So it's endless, really, and it gives me a headache to even think about it. And I'm glad I'm not a chief information security officer at a company, but we work with them every day.
Now that we've talked about some of the cybersecurity implications, and that's definitely a scary rabbit hole to go down, let's talk about some of the beneficial uses of this. And we talked about how this might empower folks in the pro se arena, but could it give better access to folks, better access to justice, get better access to information? Could this be a net benefit for society at large, as opposed to every article you see kind of has the more nefarious applications of it? What are some of the net benefits that this can offer?
Yeah, well, as someone who has I've spent a career trying to see around the corner, what's next? What's coming next? I come from the fundamental premise that technology and these developments are good for society and can be very beneficial to society. That said, you just have to make sure that the proper constraints are on them. And I know there was an article by Elon Musk and others talking about the dangers of AI and how we need to study it further. So I think that will be coming, and those discussions will be coming.
There was an open letter where they were like, hey, pump the brakes on this.
Exactly.
That came out a couple months ago, maybe
Yep.
not that long ago, which I thought was interesting. And I saw a podcast with Elon Musk where he said that he thought the greatest threat to our future was when AI becomes self-developing. And that's just like going back to the 80s and Terminator. It's just, it's crazy that we're kind of on the precipice of this.
Yeah, I think those are obviously someone like that with that type of knowledge and brain power, you want to make sure that we're paying heed to putting in restrictions, to studying it, to making sure that it is only going to do good. Certainly, I think that it does open it up. It opens up all kinds of information. And in a free society, you want to have open information. And I think that around the world, there'll be many communities where this information or the type of information for which they're searching would not otherwise be available. And so for that reason, and I'm talking beyond the legal world, in the legal world, certainly knowledge and information is power. As I said, I'm not threatened by it. I'm not terribly concerned about it as a lawyer because, as Ben and I have been saying this many times throughout this podcast, there will be no substitute for the judgment of experience or for the judgment of a lawyer about what will work, what won't work in certain circumstances, or with respect to interpreting complex legal rights.
I heard one practitioner say something that I took to heart in talking about AI, that AI could eliminate some of the low-level, more repetitive tasks that are involved in the practice of law, but at least for the competent practitioners, AI allows you to practice on the leading edge of your degree, which I thought was kind of an interesting take on that. But with that, I can't thank you both enough for discussing this topic with me and our viewers. But let's conclude with a couple final points. Ben, I'll start with you. What are some closing thoughts for our audience, whether the future of the tech, the future of the regulatory environment? To use Brenda's word about seeing around the corner, what do you foresee in this space?
This technology will absolutely become something that lawyers use every single day, just as it will become technology that everyone uses daily, in the same way they use text messages or search things on Google. It's not to be something to avoid or to be scared of, but rather to embrace. A few moments ago, you gave the Elon Musk quote about the greatest threat to humanity, but even the person that he was opposing recently in that open letter, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, so the CEO of the ChatGPT company, likewise called superintelligence the greatest threat to humanity. So yes, it's a risk, but that's unavoidable. And instead, our focus should be on the great applications, empowering and democratizing access to information. And frankly, briefs are going to be better. And it won't just be the few people that use it, it'll be everyone's briefs. And so legal analysis, the standards will rise. And judges will make better decisions because they'll have more information at their disposal. So everyone's going to have to step up and bring their A game. But the reality is, I have full confidence everyone will.
And Brenda, you chair a practice group that is on the leading edge of this issue, and you're one of the leading minds in this space. For all of the clients out there that are new to this space, that are new AI companies, or that are grappling with all these issues, what would you say is the one or the couple things they can do now to try to deal with some of these issues as they seem to grow exponentially in the coming months and years?
That's a great question. I would say first, don't panic.
We can end it there. That's a perfect. It's
No,
perfect.
Douglas Adams,
I
don't
have
panic.
more to say, but don't panic. Because I heard all the same things about the internet and how is the application of law going to happen here? What do we do? And you still have the same laws. And we can boil it down. So you want to take a methodical approach to this. Make sure that you have processes and procedures to deal with employees' use of this technology. Make sure that when you're putting products out into the public sphere and you have consumers, that you do the following. You say what you do and you do what you say. In your privacy policy, your terms of use, and you're trying to be accurate, you're trying to not misrepresent anything. So that's sort of on the privacy side. On the cyber side, get ready. There are many things. Companies have state-of-the-art programs. They're doing a great job, but it's an arms race with these threat actors. Make sure that you have training on this. Make sure that your employees know, don't upload this stuff. Watch out. You're going to have to do more sophisticated training on phishing emails. There'll be new policies that will come into place. Stay ahead of the curve. Try to learn what others are doing. You can't just ignore this. You got to get on it, but it will be okay. Those are my parting words. It will be all right.
I love that. So if I can distill that, don't panic.
Yeah.
Do what you say and say what you do.
Yeah.
Get ready, which includes educate yourself. But to be honest, I wasn't joking when I said don't panic is probably the greatest piece of advice you could give, because that's all I seem to come across when it comes to this issue is folks being very, very concerned.
It will be all right.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Brenda. I can't thank you enough. Ben, I can't thank you guys enough for talking with us. Thank you so much. And with that, this is Matt telling all of you out there to please stay safe in the electronic wilderness. We will see you next time. Thanks so much.
And don't panic. Bye.
Thank you for having us. Thanks, Matt.